I was only in grade 5, so I was only 9 or 10 years old at the time, and I used to catch the bus from Altona to Laverton. It's about half an hour trip, and he was the assistant priest there, and he came around to the classrooms looking for altar boys, and so I put my hand up and signed up to be an altar boy, and that's how I first got to know him. He used to have he always had already started up like a youth group, a youth club, you know, and that was a little way away from the place, and we'd sometimes come back to his place and he'd have a meeting of the kids who were altar boys and things, and sometimes he would, you know, he'd crack dirty jokes, and he started to swear, and then he'd encourage us to swear, and then gradually I started to live at his, started to go and stay at his place. He'd say, come and study at my place. And then I started to actually sleep there some nights. I would be asleep at his place and he would actually come into my bed in the middle of the night, and I would pretend to still be asleep. And he would start to, you know, sometimes, you know, he'd be in his pyjamas, and other times he'd be naked, you know, and he'd come into the bed and he'd, you know, start touching me and put his hand down my pyjamas onto my penis and everything, and then he'd make me do the same thing to him, although I didn't look at him or anything. It just sort of happened in the dark and everything like that, you know. No words were ever spoken during any of it, and I could never look at his face, and, you know, there was... I felt, you know...
Do you want to take a break, Tony, and have a glass of water or something?
I can't. I find it hard to talk about it. He used to like masquerade as my father, and I remember in particular, you know, I was telling you, like, I was really into footy, and he was the one who always took me to the games, but he didn't wear his priestly garb. He just wore normal civilian clothes, and everyone thought that he was my father. This particular day, my dad, my actual dad, turned up at the game, but he was in the outer, you know, at the Western Oval. He was standing out in the outer, and there was a guy who was on the you know, not the committee, but the team manager kind of guy. He worked with my dad, and he came over he knew my dad was a drinker, and I didn't like this guy at all, but he came over and said, "Oh, your dad's standing in the outer, you know." And I wanted to find a hole to crawl into, you know, because here was this priest is masquerading as my dad. I mean, my dad... He was an alcoholic, but he never hit me or did anything like that. And I just felt totally ashamed that I couldn't say anything, you know. And he didn't. You know, a true priest would have gone out there and brought him in, you know, and told the truth, like who he was, but he didn't do that, you know. Kept having, you know, serious breakdowns at work, and then eventually had to leave teaching. And it wasn't until the early 90s that I started to go to a counsellor up here she was the first person I told, and that's when I told Lou.
When I was told, it was like, I guess I likened it to if you've just been told that someone's really close to you has died, and so you have this sense of disbelief. And I guess I hung on to that disbelief for as long as I could. and for me that's what it was like, and I didn't take it any further.
He just totally minimised and said, well, what are you worried about? Something that's happened in the past, and it's not such a big deal, and it's nothing like. He totally, minimised the whole deal. And so it was after that I determined, I was determined to go and see the Vicar General, and Lou and I went together, and it was on the 10th of August 1994. And when now realising what an amazing, thing that was, because Father Frank Klepp had already been charged with numerous counts. He was a Salesian priest. He'd already been charged with numerous counts of sexual abuse in 1994, and in fact was convicted in December of 1994. And in 1995, another file note says that he was still acting as Rubeo's spiritual advisor. We discovered that he pleaded guilty to one charge of indecent assault against me and one charge of indecent assault against the other victim. And this only represented the tip of the iceberg and not the truth at all. Stunningly, when Nicole and another officer went to charge him at Port Arlington, they knocked on the door, and Rubeo opened the door, and they said, we want you to come down to the police station, we want you to discuss some things. And he kept the door sort of half ajar, and Nicole questioned him and said, who's in there? Oh, nobody, just a friend, he said. And as it turned out, Nicole was quite persistent, and maybe the other police officer with her was insistent, and they actually were able to go into the house, and they found him alone with a 10-year-old boy. Whether he was being abused or not, I'll never know, but I strongly suspect that he'd groomed that same family in a similar way. It was meant to be at 9 a.m, and I got a call from Nicole, the police informant, at about 10 o'clock saying that Rubeo had died that morning. So the whole rug was pulled out from under our feet again in terms of being able to expose him, and to tell the truth about him.
I think the fact that the church hadn't acted at all for 2 years, and I question even if the police hadn't been involved, whether the church would have done anything at all. So, but the fact that they hadn't done anything when he had gone and asked, and he went and saw both Archbishop Pell and Archbishop Hart. So it sort of became a secondary abuse for him, in a sense, because for him, he always tried to find some sense of peace to try to make everything okay, and he went thinking he's going through all the right channels to do that, but nothing was coming off. So that was really heartbreaking, and for me it's been heartbreaking seeing how it has affected him.
It's been a long journey, but the biggest factor is I think that I met Lou when I was so young, and even though I didn't tell her about what happened, like our relationship and then the kids, you know.
I think the church needs to take full responsibility for what has happened instead of duck shoving it. For me, they're not looking after their core business. I like to ask every one of them why in the hell they ever became a priest in the first place.
So I'd say that, you know, your family support has been, you know, critical, and that's basically been what's got me through. I think if it wasn't for them, I know when I saw those pictures of the suicide victims in the paper, you know, like that was incredibly moving to see their faces. And I know that if it wasn't for, you know, Lou and the kids, that I probably could have easily been one of them, you know.